in Greece. Now it's been established that our music, as so much else of Western civilization, originated in Mesopotamia. After excavating at Lagash, the archaeologist Spade uncovered Nippur, the one-time religious center of Sumer and Akkad. At Shuruppak, schoolhouses dating to the 3rd millennium BC were found. At Ur, scholars found magnificent vases, jewelry, weapons, chariots, helmets made of gold, silver, copper, and bronze, the remains of a weaving factory, and a towering ziggurat. At Kish, monumental buildings and a ziggurat from at least 3000 BC were unearthed. Uruk took the archaeologists back into the 4th millennium BC. Further south, archaeologists found Urdu, the first Sumerian city. When the Spades came upon the foundations of the first temple, below that was virgin soil. The time was about 3800 BC. That is when civilization began. Having begun to use the stones as tools some 2 million years earlier, man achieved this unprecedented civilization in about 3800 BC. And the perplexing fact about this is that to this very day, the scholars have no inkling who the Sumerians were and how and why their civilization appeared. Joseph Campbell summed it up this way: with stunning abruptness, there appears in this little Sumerian mud garden the whole cultural syndrome that has since constituted the germinal unit of all the high civilizations of the world. What was it that after hundreds of thousands and even millions of years of painfully slow human development abruptly changed everything so completely? One can go further and ask even more. Why did it happen at all? The Sumerians, the people through whom this high civilization so suddenly came into being, had a ready answer. It was summed up by one of the tens of thousands of ancient Mesopotamian inscriptions that have been uncovered. Whatever seems beautiful, we made by the grace of the gods. The gods of Sumer. Who were they? Were the gods of the Sumerians like the Greek gods, who were described as living in a great court, feasting in the great hall of Zeus in the heavens? Olympus, whose counterpart on earth was Greece's highest peak, Mount Olympus. The Greeks described their gods as anthropomorphic, as physically similar to mortal man and woman, and human in character. They could be happy and angry and jealous. They made love, quarreled, fought. They even procreated like humans, bringing forth offspring through sexual intercourse with each other or with humans. They were unreachable, and yet they were constantly mixed up in human affairs. They could travel at immense speeds, appear and disappear. Each had specific functions, and as a result, a specific human activity could suffer or benefit by the attitude of the god in charge of that particular activity. Therefore, rituals of worship and offerings to the gods were supposed to gain their favor. But their total number, 12, could not be exceeded. It appears that the number 12 was a requirement. Though Greek mythology was not clear regarding the origins of mankind, the legends and traditions claim descent from the gods for heroes and kings. These semi-gods form the link between the human destiny, daily toil, dependence on the elements, plagues, illness, death, and a golden past, when only the gods roam the earth. And although so many of the gods were born on earth, the select circle of 12 Olympians represented the celestial aspect of the gods. The original Olympus was described by the Odyssey as laying in the pure upper air. The original 12 great gods were gods of heaven who had come down to earth, and they represented the 12 celestial bodies in the vault of heaven. The Latin names of the Greek gods given them when the Romans adopted the Greek pantheon clarify their astral association. Gaia was Earth, Hermes, Mercury, Aphrodite, Venus, Ares, Mars, Cronus, Saturn, and Zeus, Jupiter. Continuing the Greek tradition, the Romans envisioned Jupiter as a thundering god whose weapon was the lightning bolt. Like the Greeks, the Romans associated him with the bull. There is now general agreement that the foundations of the distinct Greek civilization were laid on the island of Crete, where the Minoan culture flourished from about 2700 BC to 1400 BC. The Greeks, in fact, never claimed that their Olympian gods came directly to Greece from the heavens. Zeus arrived from across the Mediterranean via Crete. Aphrodite was said to have come by sea from the Near East. Poseidon, Neptune to the Romans, brought the horse with him from Asia Minor. Athena brought the olive, fertile and self-sown, to Greece from the lands of the Bible. There is no doubt that the Greek traditions and religion arrived on the Greek mainland from the Near East via Asia Minor and the Mediterranean islands. It is there that the pantheon had its roots. It is there that we should look for the origin of the Greek gods and their astral relationship with the number 12. Hinduism, the ancient religion of India, considers the Vedas, compositions of hymns, sacrificial formulas, and other sayings pertaining to the gods, as sacred scriptures not of human origin. The gods themselves composed them, the Hindu tradition says, in the age that preceded the present one. But as time went on, more and more of the original 100,000 verses passed from generation to generation orally were lost and confused. In the end, a sage wrote down the remaining verses, divided them into 4 books, entrusting 4 of his principal disciples to preserve 1 Veda each. When in the 19th century scholars began to decipher and understand forgotten languages and trace the connections between them, they realized that the Vedas were written in a very ancient Indo-European language, the predecessor of the Indian root tongue Sanskrit, of Greek, Latin, and other European languages. When they were finally able to read and analyze the Vedas, they were surprised to see the uncanny similarity between Vedic tales of the gods and the Greek ones. The tales concerning the principal deities, as well as verses dealing with a multitude of other lesser deities, are clearly related to the Greek tales. And in both instances, the circle of the great gods always stood at 12, no matter what changes took place in the divine succession. How could such similarity arise in 2 areas so far apart geographically and in time? Scholars believe that sometime in the 2nd millennium BC, a people speaking an Indo-European language and centered in northern Iran, or the Caucasus area, embarked on great migrations. One group went southeast to India. The Hindus call them the Aryans, noble men. They brought with them the Vedas, or oral tales, about 1500 BC. Another wave of this Indo-European migration went westward to Europe. Some circled the Black Sea and arrived in Europe via the steppes of Russia. But the main route by which these people and their traditions and religion reached Greece was the shortest one, Asia Minor. Some of the most ancient Greek cities, in fact, lie not in the Greek mainland, but in the western tip of Asia Minor. But who were these Indo-Europeans who chose Anatolia as their abode? Little in Western knowledge shed light on that subject once again. The only readily available and reliable source proved to be the Old Testament. There, the scholars found several references to the Hittites as the people inhabiting the mountains of Anatolia. Forearmed with clues provided in Egyptian and Mesopotamian text, the scholars embarked on excavations of ancient sites in Anatolia's hilly regions. The efforts paid off. They found Hittite cities, palaces, royal treasures, royal tombs, temples, religious objects, tools, weapons, art objects. Above all, they found many inscriptions. The biblical Hittites had come to life. A unique monument bequeathed to us by the ancient Near East is a rock carving outside the ancient Hittite capital on which all of the gods of the Hittites were depicted in procession. Marching in from left in a long procession of primarily male deities clearly organized in companies of 12. Much effort was invested by scholars to determine the names, titles, and roles of the deities included in the procession. But it's clear that the Hittite pantheon, too, was governed by the Olympian 12. The lesser gods were organized in groups of 12, and the great gods on earth were associated with 12 celestial bodies. The archaeological finds showed conclusively that the Hittites worshipped gods that were of heaven and earth, all interrelated and arranged in a genealogical hierarchy. Some were great or olden gods who were originally of the heavens. Other gods were actually present, not merely on earth, but among the Hittites, acting as supreme rulers of the land. A long and well-preserved Hittite epic tale entitled Kingship in Heaven deals with the heavenly origin of the gods, thus establishing that the gods of old were both of heaven and upon earth. The epic lists the 12 mighty olden ones, the forebearers of the gods, and proceeds to tell how the god who was king in heaven came to dark-hued earth. A god named Alalu was forcibly deposed from his throne somewhere in the heavens, and fleeing for his life descended to earth. But that was not the end. The text proceeded to recount how Anu, in turn, was also deposed by a god named Kumarbi, Anu's own brother, by some interpretations. There is no doubt that this epic, written 1,000 years before the Greek legends were composed, was the forerunner of the tale of the disposing of Uranus by Cronus and of Cronus by Zeus. Even the detail pertaining to the castration of Cronus by Zeus is found in the Hittite text, for that was exactly what Kumarbi did to Anu. Though emasculated, Anu managed to fly back to his heavenly abode, leaving Kumarbi in control of Earth. Meanwhile, Anu's manhood produced several deities within Kumarbi's insides, which he, like Cronus of the Greek legends, was forced to release. One of these was Teshub, the chief Hittite deity. However, there was to be one more epic battle before Teshub could rule in peace. Did the particular battles fought by Teshub upon earth and in the skies take place when the age of Taurus commenced around 4000 BC? Was it for that reason that the winner was granted association with the bull? And were the events in any way connected with the beginning, at the very same time, of the sudden civilization in Sumer? There could be no doubt that the Hittite pantheon and tales of the gods indeed had their roots in Sumer, its civilization, and its gods. The tale of the challenge to the divine throne continues to relate heroic battles, but of an inconclusive nature. At one point, the failure of Teshub to defeat his adversary even caused his spouse to attempt suicide. Finally, an appeal was made to the gods to mediate the dispute, and an assembly of the gods was called. It was led by an olden god named Enlil and another olden god named Ea, who was called upon to produce the old tablets with the words of destiny, some ancient records that could apparently help settle the dispute regarding the divine succession. Who were these olden gods? All of them bear Sumerian names. Even the name Teshub, as well as the names of other Hittite gods, were often written in Sumerian script to denote their identities. Also, some of the places named in the action were those of ancient Sumerian sites. It dawned on the scholars that the Hittites, in fact, worshipped a pantheon of Sumerian origins. Now, when the Hittites reached Babylon sometime after 1600 BC, the Sumerians were already long gone from the Near Eastern scene. How was it, then, that their language, literature, and religion dominated another great kingdom in another millennium and in another part of Asia? The bridge scholars have recently discovered were a people called Hurrians. Referred to in the Old Testament as Horites, meaning free people, they dominated the wide area between Sumer and Akkad in Mesopotamia and the Hittite kingdom in Anatolia. Egyptian and Mesopotamian royal documents referred to the Hurrian kingdom as Mitanni and dealt with it on an equal footing, a strong power whose influence spread beyond its immediate borders. The Hittites called their Hurrian neighbors Hurai. These Hurrians dominated the Hittites culturally and religiously. The Hittites acquired their cosmology, their myths, their gods, and their pantheon of 12 from the Hurrians. Since the culture and religion were only a development of the original Sumerian traditions and beliefs, the Hurrians, in fact, absorbed and transmitted the religion of Sumer. The epic tales, it has become clear, were the tales of Sumer, the dwelling place of the olden gods, were Sumerian cities. The olden language was the language of Sumer. Even the Hurrian art duplicated Sumerian art, its form, its themes, and its symbols. Evidence suggests that the Hurrians, who were the northern neighbors of Sumer and Akkad in the second millennium BC, had actually commingled with Sumerians in the previous millennium. In the 13th century BC, under the pressure of vast migrations and invasions, including the Israelite thrust from Egypt to Canaan, the Hurrians retreated to the northeastern portion of their kingdom. There, they worshipped a pantheon headed by Teshub, depicting him as a vigorous god wearing a horned cap and standing upon his cult symbol, the bull. What about the other avenue by which the tales and worship of gods reached Greece, from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean via Crete and Cyprus? The lands that are today Israel, Lebanon, and southern Syria, which form the southwestern band of the ancient Fertile Crescent, were then the habitat of people that can be grouped together as Canaanites. The Canaanite language was what scholars call West Semitic, a branch of a group of languages which also includes the earliest Akkadian and present-day Hebrew. The language, literary style, and terminology are reminiscent of the Old Testament. The pantheon that unfolds from the Canaanite text bears many similarities to the later Greek one. Whence had the Canaanites, for their part, drawn their culture and religion? Well, the Old Testament considered them a part of the Hamitic family of nations with roots in the hot lands of Africa, brothers of the Egyptians. The artifacts and written records unearthed by archaeologists confirm the close affinity between the two, as well as the many similarities between the Canaanite and Egyptian deities. The many national and local gods, the multitude of their names and epithets, the diversity of their roles, emblems, and animal mascots, at first cast the gods of Egypt as an unfathomable crowd of actors upon a strange stage. But a closer look reveals that they were essentially no different from those in the other lands of the ancient world. The Egyptians believed in gods of heaven and earth, great gods that were clearly distinguished from the multitude of lesser deities. G.A. Wainwright summed up the evidence showing that the Egyptian belief in gods of heaven who descended to earth from the skies was extremely ancient. The Egyptian word for divine being or God was enter, which means one who watches. Significantly, that is exactly the meaning of the name Sumer, the land of the ones who watch. The earlier notion that civilization may have begun in Egypt has been discarded by now. There's ample evidence showing that the Egyptian organized society and civilization, which began half a millennium and more after the Sumerian one, drew its culture, architecture, technology, art of writing, and the many other aspects of a high civilization from Sumer. The weight of evidence also shows that the gods of Egypt originated in Sumer. Cultural and blood kinsmen of the Egyptians, the Canaanites shared the same gods with them, but situated in a land strip that was a bridge between Asia and Africa from time immemorial. The Canaanites also came under strong Semitic and Mesopotamian influences. Like the Hittites to the north, the Hurrians to the northeast, the Egyptians to the south, the Canaanites could not boast of an original pantheon. They too acquired their cosmogony, their deities, their legendary tales from elsewhere. Their direct contacts with the Sumerian sources were the Amorites. The lands of the Amorites lay between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean lands of Western Asia. In the 1930s, archaeologists came upon the center and capital city of the Amorites, known as Mari. At a bend of the Euphrates, where the Syrian border now cuts the river, the diggers uncovered a major cities whose buildings were erected and continuously re-erected between 3000 and 2000 BC on foundations that date to centuries earlier. These earliest remains included a step pyramid and temples of the Sumerian deities. The palace of Mari alone occupied some 5 acres and included a throne room painted with most striking murals, 300 various rooms, scribal chambers, and well over 20,000 tablets in the cuneiform script, dealing with the economy, trade, politics, and social life of the times, with state and military matters, and, of course, with the religion of the land and its people. Among the finds at Mari, as elsewhere in the lands of Sumer, there were dozens of statues of the people themselves, kings, nobles, priests, singers. They were invariably depicted with their hands clasped in prayer, their gaze frozen forever toward their gods. Who were these gods of heaven and earth, divine yet human, always headed by a pantheon or inner circle of 12 deities? We have entered the temples of the Greeks and the Aryans, the Hittites and the Hurrians, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. We have followed paths that took us across continents and seas, and clues that carried us over several millennia. All of the corridors of all of the temples have led us to one source: Sumer. There were, the Sumerians believed, gods that were of the heavens. Texts dealing with the time before things were created talk of such heavenly gods. As we look closer at these gods, we shall realize that they were the celestial bodies that make up our solar system. There were also lesser gods that were of earth. Between the two groups, there were gods of heaven and earth, the ones called the ancient gods. They were the olden gods of the epic tales, and in the Sumerian belief, they had come down to earth from the heavens. These were no mere local deities, they were national gods, indeed international gods. Some of them were present and active upon the earth even before there were men upon the earth. Indeed, the very existence of man was deemed to have been the result of a deliberate, creative enterprise on the part of these gods. They were powerful, capable of feats beyond mortal ability and comprehension, yet these gods not only looked like humans, but ate and drank like them and displayed virtually every human emotion of love and hate, loyalty and infidelity. The head of this family of gods of heaven and earth was An, or Anu in the Babylonian Assyrian text. He was the great father of the gods, the king of the gods. His symbol was a star. In the Sumerian pictographic writing, the sign of a star also stood for An, for heaven, and for divine being or God. Anu's abode, and the seat of his kingdom, was in the heavens. That is where the other gods of heaven and earth went when they needed individual advice or favor, or where they met in assembly to settle disputes among themselves or to reach major decisions. Numerous